Welcome to our panel on sound and inclusive education. I'm Simon Hunt, and today I'm fortunate enough to have three wonderful panellists. We have Laura, Helen and Jamie. Now today we are filming in the Rainbow Hub School, which is in Maudsley. Now this school is a school for children with physical and neurological disabilities, and they rely heavily on donations. So for every question that is posted, ViewSonic will donate some money towards the school. Let's start by getting to know our panellists a little bit more. So could each of you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jamie Gilbert and I am Assistant Head Teacher of an SMH provision in North Tyneside.
Hi, I'm Helen Hatton. I'm a freelance educational consultant. My company is Iris Coaching and Consultancy, and I work with schools across the UK on inclusion for children with attachment trauma and SEMH difficulties.
Hi, I'm Laura Tarantini-Moore. I'm an SEND and EAL consultant for Large Mat, which is London-based, and I also have my own consultancy business called Tarantini on Teaching.
So I know this is a huge question, but what does inclusivity mean to you?
From my perspective, working with fantastic neurodivergent children is just meeting the needs, the individual needs, and tailoring your practice, being adaptable and flexible to support them in any way you can.
Wonderful. Helen?
This question has many layers for me, because we can talk about it on a classroom base and we can talk about like the actual definition. So for me, when I go into schools, I look at practice and policy and how we can enable any disadvantaged or any stigmatised group to be able to be included so they can fulfil their education journey really. But inclusion to me is bigger than that, because it's not just about meeting the needs of the individual. Children, like Jamie said, for my approach, it's about including the family as well and ensuring that you have a community within your school, that everybody is catered for and understood.
I think that I agree with the last two points of view that were put forward. I also think that something we don't necessarily consider is that the people who we want to include are actually bringing stuff that everybody else needs as well. So it's not that there's a mainstream or there's a normal that, and we have to include people who are different. Actually, those people who are different need to help the normies as well. So inclusion is really about everybody being able to contribute and everybody having something to take from that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's about sense of belonging and everyone feels valued and heard and seen. Mm-hmm. And like Jamie said, having needs met really and understood, isn't it?
Yeah, it's obviously massively individual as well. So what can work for one student is going to have to be completely different to the next. So it's having that flexibility as well.
How do I define inclusivity? It's just that every child matters, that we're all different. And like you said, the norm is what's good for one child might not work for the other. I'm a primary school teacher. I just want every child to be able to flourish and to learn, and whatever we need to do to get that out of them, we do the best as we can.
It's just about removing those barriers, isn't it? And putting things in place as practitioners just to best support the needs we can.
Regardless of background, I think, absolutely, it is about removing those barriers to learning, regardless of their starting points, because we're all starting, at different stages. That needs to be embraced, really, because every child has a right to an education.
Absolutely.
I think inclusivity is also about empathy, because you're not going to be able to understand the barriers for somebody unless you can put themselves, you can put yourself in their position. And that's, I think, incredibly important, certainly as a teacher, as someone who's involved in education. How do you see things from another person's point of view so we can understand what the barriers are?
Mm. And having that compassion as well. Mm. It's about being curious.
So let's first talk about what inclusivity looks like in the classroom. I know this, again, is a big question, but what needs are you seeing in your classrooms?
So what I'm seeing at the minute with needs in the classroom is, and I think there's been a big impact since COVID really on this, regionally and nationally, that one approach doesn't fit all for the children, and staff in the classroom, the teachers, are having to really adapt their teaching to be able to support the diverse needs that are coming in. And I think that it's always been present, but since COVID, I think this has deepened. So I think having that understanding about the children and building those relationships and those connections with the children very quickly and early on is helping to build an inclusive environment. I think there's a lot more knowledge out there, especially, or a lot more hype around neurodivergency, and the children understand themselves and children understand their rights as well. So I think it's just really, really key to have that time to share those connections, you know, those relationships, and really find out, because children have voices. And I think that's a really important, as you know, aspect when we're talking about that inclusion in the classroom.
I think you've touched on it there about the social implications of lockdown as well. So working in an SMH environment, we're really trying to promote these social skills and trying to get the first thing we teach the children is to use their words. If they can communicate the issue, we can 9 times out of 10 we can resolve it there and then. But I think the implication of lockdown has had an impact socially on some of our children.
I think that across the schools that I work in, and that's a lot of kids that you're talking about, and it's mostly secondary schools, we are looking at a lot of neurodivergent children, a lot of attention, language needs in particular. I also work with kids who are refugee or who from resettled families, and that is a whole other kettle of fish in terms of attending to their language needs, any potential learning needs, mental health needs, and just the social needs of what situation that family is in. So that's something that needs looking at holistically, which is not at the moment. I also work with EAL children in terms of bilingualism and valuing bilingualism, and so you're talking quite a large picture of both language needs and learning needs that I think that teachers are not, they're just not really prepared, I think, for the sheer amount and the differences between the kids. And so where we can, as educators, where we can find the common threads between these kids that we can then approach in the classrooms, that's where I think you start to be able to hit those sweet spots of what, you know, of what's going to work for those kids.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of more diverse needs within families now, and families are not the typical setups, you know, with 2.4 children anymore, and I think that does make cultural impact with that as well, that really needs to be considered, and I think that's really important to be able to, for a school, but for a teacher as well, to build up the relationships with the parents and say, you know, how can we keep this dialogue going between us about your child? What does the communication look like? Because like what you touched on, Laura, with EAL, there's a lot of parents out there that have their own educational trauma as well, that really struggle to understand the system, you know, understand the school, but also have that barrier when wanting to approach a teacher because, you know, of their own memories. So I think it runs deeper than that understanding and that empathy that we spoke about before is really key to break down those barriers, to have that whole approach for inclusion in the classroom.
Yeah, Laura, you mentioned teacher training. What teacher training is there for teachers at the moment to help with this, or what's missing, do you think?
Well, number one, I don't think that there is a lot of teacher training on EAL specifically at all. I think that teacher training has become quite condensed. And so even though you have the 3 years of the ECT kind of program, I think in terms of initial teacher training, teachers aren't actually taught about language, oddly, because the entire curriculum is delivered through language. And so having people become aware of their own language, what are the parts of the English language that I find difficult or that other people find difficult? How would I then apply that to somebody else who's learning English as a second language, or kids who have speech and language needs? I mean, people are just not, I don't think teachers are used to thinking about their own language and how they deliver through that language. There's a lot of curriculum content. It's kind of content, and I don't think teachers teachers in training have a chance to step back and think, what does this look like from the other side of the divide? I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be child-centered, but it doesn't always work out that way somehow.
Yeah, and I honestly, I firmly believe that the education system hasn't moved on to be able to meet the needs of the children. So when I'm training in schools and writing policies, I call them relational behaviour policies, we speak about how the education system was very much based on an authoritarian approach, where children were sanctioned, you know, and even worse, you know, it wasn't that long ago that corporal punishment was still around. You know, a lot of our staff have living memory of that, but our children don't respond to that approach. Our families don't respond to that approach. And even now the behavioural approach, where it's like good or bad and having the rewards in place, children want a deeper understanding of themselves, and they want to be able to develop their own self-identity as human beings within school. So I think for teachers, I think there is a gap within the teacher training, most definitely, that needs to be filled. I know when I trained 20 years ago, we didn't get any sort of behaviour management then, or classroom management. We were just asked to read the behaviour policy of the school that we're going in to do our training in, or, you know, our practice in. And I don't feel that there is enough, and that's really key to that staff awareness and that understanding. And you'll know that, Jamie, won't you? Because, you know, within your school, because that's when you get the cohesion and you get the inclusion, because everybody is working from the same page, really.
Yeah, if you look at a typical mainstream school, the number of SNH children is escalating year on year, but there's still not specific support or training for teachers around how to support like a neurodivergent student in the classroom. We need to be teaching, educating teachers and anyone involved in education around strategies to be able to regulate our children. If our children aren't regulated, they're not going to learn anything. That's the fundamentals. If we get the regulation part bit right, then the academic will come later in time. There's so much emphasis on academic attainment. There's not enough on the holistic side of it. We've got to be looking at assessing a child holistically, looking at the overall child development rather than just academic. And from my personal teaching experience, there wasn't that kind of training on how to support a neurodivergent child in the classroom. It's something I've had to pick up, something I've had to adapt, something I've had to learn over time. And my own personal diagnosis of ADHD has actually helped with that, to be able to relate to children who are neurodivergent, because I'm neurodivergent myself. But I've had to learn those skills myself. That's not something readily available to educators worldwide, basically,
And I think that's really key, because I think, if I'm going back to what I said before about the behavioural approach, it was all about fixing the behaviour. Whereas now, I think inclusion is acceptance, like accepting the child or the person for who they are, but also allowing them to accept themselves so they have that self-awareness.
Absolutely. Behaviour is a form of communication. So rather than looking at the surface behaviour, what is that child actually trying to communicate?
Yeah, because they potentially haven't got that language, because they've either been through trauma or, you know, the neurodivergent. But I think that is really key, to be able to understand and move the system forward. In one respect, though, we don't want to scare trainee teachers away and ECTs at all, because you're under a lot of pressure as a teacher. And I remember my PGCE year, it was intense. I had all the placements and you had to learn on the spot super quick. I was taught maths. And the funny thing, I remember submitting my maths assignment and got critiqued on my English, and I couldn't get my head around that, you know. But there is so much pressure that you're under. But there are quick wins that you can do that will really support teachers to be able to bring inclusion and belonging into the classroom. You know, we've all been teachers to begin with, and I'm sure we've got that experience. But when I was class-based, it was Team Hatton all the way. And when you were in my classroom, you were part of my family. Absolutely. You were here, and I was pleased that you were here every single day and what you brought with you.
I think the fresh start approach is so important for that. So I do a big thing when a child comes into the classroom, that meet and greet. You get like a little fist bump as soon as you come in. Then you'll be feeling something now. I might blow it up, or like the little high five, and then you're immediately getting that positive interaction. So if you've been, I don't know, you might have had a negative interaction on the way to school, you're going to forget all that a little bit, and it's just going to try and get your, like you alluded to earlier, Simon, that ready to learn, that growth mindset. If you've got that positive interaction straight away and you're matching it with positive energy, that energy can be infectious. And then what an amazing way to start the day from.
You're completely right. And, you know, I always, like you do fist bumps, I just smile to the children, because you could be the first person that smiled and give that positive, you know, hug, hi and high five and a smile and come out, you okay? You could be the first person that day to have said that to them. And it means so much to that child, but also as a teacher, because I'm class-based, I know those relationships are just always just going to foster and build and build and build, which will help you. When you want the academic side out of them, you've got that relationship together, and then you can pull that academic side out of them. But it's all about relationships with every single child.
It's the most fundamental component.
It's about repetition as well, because we're talking about rewiring the brain, because a lot of children, they may not have had these positive relationships in their lives that we're bringing, and especially if they're on their own journey, like you've been on, Jamie, and, you know, misunderstood a lot of the way, that we're actually showing, actually, this is how we interact, and it is that constant drip every day, isn't it? And you say the most powerful connection is a smile or that 30-second conversation, but they're learning so much.
Yeah, there's also the opportunity in the teenage years to rewire the brain. So we'll do therapeutic stuff with some of my teenage boys, like playing with sand and water. So something they've missed from early childhood, just to try and get that connection. I'm doing a lot of Lego at the minute with my 15, 16-year-old boys who absolutely love it as well, just through that kinesthetic, kind of hands-on play as well. So there is an opportunity to rewire the brain in the secondary age as well. And that's why that transition from year 6 into year 7 is so massive, because that's when your brain is going through like another stage.
I think that because curriculum, again, like I said before, the curriculum is so tight, is so thick with stuff that teachers have to get through, the idea that I don't think teachers are being told that to be a good teacher is to deliver the content and to deliver it at a speed, and lessons require pace, and that's what it means to be a good teacher. And actually taking that step back and doing what I call the noticing and the noting, and just watching your class and watching the interactions and learning who they are as people, I think is lost as a skill. Or if teachers naturally do it, they are told, yeah, but that's, you have to be, you know, have to be pacey. You have to be, things have to be like next task and next task, and it's not necessarily the case. I think that those sort of human instincts that a lot of teachers bring with them are put to the side, because it is so much about curriculum and content and getting them through. And being a good teacher means delivering good content, and that's not always where it lies with a lot of our kids.
You've you're absolutely spot on. You've got to be, you can be brave, and you can adapt the curriculum to meet the needs of your class and your children. So I was able, with a primary class a few years ago, they were all ADHD, and I was able to unlock hyper focus through their writing. So that was absolutely amazing. So the way I was able to unlock the hyperfocus was tailoring my teaching to their personal interests. So still hitting a national curriculum objective. So say we're doing like year 4 non-chronological reports. You don't have to follow the curriculum, say, oh, you have to do it on plants. Tailor it around their interests. Make it personal to them, something relatable. And there's always ways you can hit a learning objective rather than just kind of just reading it. You know, there's ways around we can tailor our practice to meet these needs.
Yeah. And you're right, it is all about noticing and just taking that step back and just finding those common grounds that you can connect with, that gather their interests in.
Yeah.
I think teaching is also getting younger. So there is that kind of layer of middle leadership, those heads of department who are able to say to younger teachers, it's okay, what you're doing is okay. It's your classroom, these are your kids, just try something. That layer of people that kept everybody calm may be leaving the profession or maybe going other places. And so you don't have anybody who's saying to teachers, like, trust yourself. You know, it's cool.
Yeah.
As long as you're within safeguarding boundaries and you've got your, like, you know what the school policies are and whatnot, just go for something. This is your classroom. These are your kids.
Absolutely.
You know, own them, own your classroom, and just take a chance. Just take a bit of a chance.
You're right.
Absolutely.
I had to do that because when I first came into the profession in this country, 24 years ago, I didn't have a head of department. I didn't have an education in this country that I could pull from in terms of a memory. I didn't understand I remember having a conversation with my mom, who was also a teacher, clinical child psych, and me saying, they're not doing their homework, Mom. She's like, well, we'll lower their grades. I'm like, well, they don't get grades. She's like, well, what do they do? I was like, I don't know. And having to find all that out, and being in an area that had very low aspirations, a very high poverty area, and building excellent practice over a long classroom career of 9 years. And I stayed in the classroom. I stayed in the classroom because I wanted to learn my craft. I was also raising my children. But I don't know how many teachers, again, have that middle layer above them to tell them it's okay, and then stay in the classrooms so they can actually learn their craft, because it is a craft, you know, and it takes time.
And I think that's it. I think that it is just giving that permission. Teachers have got great ideas. And, you know, the younger teachers are so current with, I don't know, all the technology, but then also all the trends that, you know, they bring, you know, the TikToks, but they bring so much. But it is just about saying, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. And to do that and just having that time off the timetable. I mean, where did show and tell go? Do you still do show and tell?
Yep, we do.
Do you?
We
Well
do,
done,
yeah.
Simon. Yeah.
We
I think
do.
we would get some strange objects coming from an SMH perspective.
Possibly.
We do show and tell, and I have to show and tell as well.
Yes.
So that's part of it. So I have to talk about what I've been, and I think building that relationships with the children. I think sometimes, because I'm quite tall, male primary school teacher in year 3, so some of the children come up to me, they look up like this, and like, who's this tall guy? But actually, I'm big into Transformers, you know, I love my computer games, I've got interest, I make mistakes, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. But it's that, you know, them getting to know you as well as you getting to know them, it breaks that barrier back down as that teacher, that relationship, that child-teacher relationship. Well, Helen, you mentioned technology. What technology is out there to help teachers, and how well is it being used, do you think?
Oh, God.
To breaking down barriers to learning, I definitely think with iPads, there is definitely using tablets and visualize. I love visualizers. When I'm sat in a classroom observing, say if I'm observing the whole cohort or if I'm observing individual, and a teacher is demonstrating the handwriting or art, you know, on a visualizer and it comes on the board, I think that's absolutely fantastic, because when I started teaching, you didn't have that. You used to have a table like this and they all used to gather round, and you can imagine, can't you, Jamie? They used to be like pushing, trying to get to the front. But now it's just there and it's clear and it's projected on the board and that's fantastic. My daughter is certified blind and she uses an iPad within her classroom. She takes photographs of what's on the board and she's then able to zoom in so she can access it, because she can't see what's written on the board. She can see that the teacher is writing something but doesn't know what's there. But then the math scheme is able to go on the iPad as well, so she can zoom in and write on there instead of having like copious amounts of photocopying. I mean, I'm not as experienced and class-based anymore. I'm all about the relationships and like supporting behaviour. I'm sure you've probably got more experience with technology in the classroom in that sense.
Well, when you mentioned the visualizer, so in class, we had a child that has a visual impairment that struggled to see the board. And we used to, I think we mentioned before, we used to print off like large pieces of paper. And he was very conscious of the fact that everyone else was looking at the board. He had these printed things out. So in fact, pulling back to the ViewSonic board, so we export slides now. So what he does is he scans the board with his device and he can zoom in and out. So he's got the same as everyone else, but it's so he can see it. And he's absolutely flourished, and he's now gone to year 5. And because of the success of that in the classroom, in year 5, he's now doing that with his teacher as well. So his teacher's now taking that on board, and now he's now scanning everything. He just scans a QR code, and there's all his lessons in front of him, and he takes that, you know, because he's aware that people could see that he had large pieces of paper. So he's kind of, you know, he's growing up and he's aware of that type of thing. But it's really, really helped him, and we can also put extra things on to help him as well. So that's changed his teaching completely. And as a teacher, it helps you as a teacher, because the traffic jam on the printer in the morning trying to print off A3 gets stuck. And if you're there trying to print off large pieces of A3 paper that's getting jammed, and then there's a big queue and the school starts in a few minutes, takes that away. Also saving paper as well.
Yeah, and my daughter felt the same, because she used to have one page which equated to about 3 A3 pages as well. So she found it really difficult to keep on track. She does touch typing as well, which I think is fantastic. I think for a lot of the children, and I think Jamie and Laura will, and you will as well, Simon, but technology really helps because there's barriers with English and writing. A lot of the young people that I see within settings that I go into, as soon as you get out a pen and a piece of paper, you can see that barrier goes up straight away. So having a laptop or an iPad or something that they can then type, or even a dictaphone. Children with dyslexia who are very eloquent, if they have that, then it can just automatically go on the screen in front of them. It breaks down huge barriers, but helps with their self-esteem, it helps with their self-worth, and ultimately they're calm and relaxed in the classroom. So I think that really helps.
It's amazing to me that it's only now that GCSEs are going to be available in editable PDF formats. I don't know if you guys, obviously your primary school. So it used to be that you had to look at an exam paper and then you'd be typing on a blank piece of paper. And now, miraculously, in terms of geography and humanities, history actually, you can now get an editable PDF where the children can type directly into the document. This is like amazing, isn't it?
10 years ago.
And I just don't understand. So I think in 2026 is when the English versions of that for English language and literature are coming through. And you think to yourself, like, I don't really understand what the continued focus is on pen and paper. Because after school, even in Key Stage 5, in college or at university, very few people write unless it's a personal preference. It's not something that we require from people professionally. What you write, how you structure a sentence is one thing. Whether or not your penmanship is perfect is quite another. And it just feels like, once again, education is just behind the time in terms of picking up the technology that's just out there in the world. I cannot win an argument with a 16-year-old who doesn't want to write, because that person will say to me, where else in my world am I ever going to write? And I have to say, gee, you're kind of correct about that. We're just not using the technology that's readily available. It's not even about the bells and whistles, as you guys say. It's just about the stuff that's already there that can be used much better than the pen and paper that we have at the moment.
Yeah, I think they need to have the basics, though. They need to be able to
Functional
skills. Yeah, they do. They need to be able.
Well, they need to be able to hold a pen and write, but there are also kids that have difficulty holding a pen.
Yeah,
So and we don't.
We can't run before we can walk.
We live in a digital age. We're in a digital age.
are.
So
Yeah.
we embrace that.
Yeah.
And if that's an actual barrier to the cognitive work that has to happen about what you're actually putting on the page, why are we focusing on paper and pen? If that's such a barrier in and of itself, both emotionally, socially, I don't understand it.
Yeah.
We would edit that from my experience. So if we have a child just outright refusing to put pen to paper, we would offer a digital version. So we would offer an iPad. It could be through Microsoft Word or a variety of different programs, just to kind of present that information in a different way. So we would meet that need.
I think it is having that alternatives, but can I put a slight barrier with inclusion and technology? Because from my experience, when I'm working with children with SEMH and they're really struggling, they see writing as a risk. It's scary to do that, to put that pen to paper. So naturally, a laptop or an iPad really helps them. However, the other children in the classroom see that and then they go, well, why did they get a laptop? Yeah. All they're doing is misbehaving, for want of their words. And why should they have that laptop? But then
It's just around education and educating.
It's about equity. And that is inclusion as well, isn't it? And so, equality, but we need to move education that next step further now and talk about equity and breaking down those barriers, but making it accessible to whatever that child needs so they can access their education. But I think that comes from having those discussions in the classrooms and even having those discussions in families as well as a family unit and explaining the different needs and why this child might need this but not need this. And it's the same for a child with a physical disability, isn't it, who needs a wheelchair or needs access to use the toilet. And I think as a society, maybe we need to be more inclusive in that respect and moving forward with that.
Your provision kind of puts all that together in a beautiful way, doesn't it?
So with writing, it's about educating the children why 3 or 4 have got an iPad. But and we talk about it and address it. Let's say explain, well, the reason why is because Mr. Hunt's handwriting's terrible, and they know that. And I always talk about my spelling is terrible. And I would have been one of those children that hated writing. I would always, when I was writing, I'd use the word big rather than gargantuan. Even though I knew the word gargantuan, I'd just stick to big because I can spell that. And that's what some of my children used to do. So what we do is we have iPads and some of them will dictate and it's their ideas, they're seeing the spelling modelled correctly and then they're writing up. And then as well with some of our children, the little chunking it. So having a sentence, write it down, split it into little parts. Again, it's each different child's needs. And we have some children, I've got wireless headsets, a bit like silent disco. And we actually did a silent disco on Friday in the playground because you can go anywhere around the school. But what we do is some of our children prefer white noise when they're writing. And some of them have headsets that just noise cancelling headsets. And some children just have white noise and they pop the headsets on, the white noise when they're writing and they're writing. But as a teacher, when you see different things going on, but they're all writing, they're all enjoying them. The producers some amazing writing, and that's what it's about. There are barriers for different children, but as a teacher, what can we do using the technology that's out there to remove these barriers to make children enjoy education, enjoy school?
And I think that's a great idea, using headphones, because, you know, when I go into schools, we talk about the environment and making it nurturing, you know, so children feel calm and relaxed, but what works for one child might not work for another. So having that white noise through headphones, I mean, that would drive me absolutely insane. Ticking clocks and anything, like I can't cope with that.
I can't do either.
I
but it's
can't.
nice to know it's
I can't.
available.
How long have you been doing that with your kids, the white noise?
We've been doing it for a couple of years now. In fact, the BBC came and they recorded how it works in class, and now part of the 500 words competition, we created some videos to show how this works. And the way I always explained it to my children with the white noise, and as a school, we initially started playing music, like relaxing music. But I explained, when I'm at home, I play music, have it really loud, and I'm writing and typing away and I'm doing my planning. Mrs. Hunt, she's in the office next door, silence. But we're both doing the same job. So that's how we decided, well, some children might want to listen to music or might want white noise, or some children might like silence. So we can cater for that by these wireless headsets, and they have their own volume on the side as well. And like I said, on a Friday, we do silent disco and stuff in class. And now all the children are singing. You can't hear any music. They're all singing and dancing around, and I am as well. Shifting from the classroom to the whole school, let's explore how inclusivity works across the whole school. So what are the relationships like between teachers, TAs, SLT and consultants?
This is something that I feel quite strongly about and quite passionate about, because when we're meeting the needs, it's got to be a whole school approach, really. So the team around the child and the team in the school is so very important. The relationships between all staff members have got to be key, and communication and that cohesion and that consistency. This is how we do it around here. This is our school. Is so important, but it really needs to start with the policy. And does the policy meet the needs of the cohort? Does it is clear with, you know, if somebody picks it up, they'll say, yes, this is absolutely our school, and you can live and breathe through that. So when I go into schools, that's what I look at and support schools to build on, like an audit, to see where the areas that they need support in, to be able to close those gaps, to make an inclusive school, really, like what you talk about, Simon.
Jamie, you've just moved to, you're now assistant head.
Yes.
So you've moved into the SLT side of it. What's it like going from a teacher to SLT for you?
Oh, it's a massive change. It's still got quite a heavy teaching timetable, teaching commitment. So I'm still teaching around about 80%. So I'm still having to try and do my SLT duties and teach in the classroom at the same time, which is really challenging. So staff can come in and kind of interrupt me like halfway through a lesson because I might have to deal with something. But I think it's just kind of I've helped like try to educate my class on why I'm getting all these interruptions, and they are aware of that. So there is quite a little bit of disruption to learning sometimes if there's like a pressing issue that needs to be dealt with. But it's a massive transition.
And do you think it's important that you're still in the classroom?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll always remain in the classroom, even if I went to headship or if I progressed to like deputy and higher up in the profession. I'll always be in the classroom. I just love that interaction with the students. It's those children who refuse their work, and when you can change their mindset and you can see that, so if I have someone point blank refusing, and I've done a little bit of work, I might do a distraction technique, I might play a game, but when you go through the process and you change a child's mindset and then there's a positive outcome, that feeling you get is just unbelievable. I would never want to eradicate that feeling. That's why there'll always be a part of my practice that's in the classroom. But just relating to teaching assistants are the fundamental of all schools. Like they are the cog. And there is a retention crisis at the minute with teaching assistants. I'm lucky to work in the SEN environment where I actually, as a teacher, I get a SEN allowance, so I get a little bit more money financially. The teaching assistants don't get that, and I think that's completely wrong. I think everybody who works in the SEN should get that SEN allowance. And that would make a massive difference in terms of recruitment as well, because you've got that kind of financial incentive. There's delivery drivers, Amazon workers who are on more money than teaching assistants. And with all the diverse needs in the classroom, especially from a SEN point of view, there's so much that teaching assistants are responsible for, and they make such a difference on a daily basis. I don't think they're kind of rewarded or recognised the way they should be.
Do you think they've got the wrong title though? I think it should be totally changed now. They shouldn't be teaching.
Superheroes.
I think there should be assistant. Yeah, superheroes.
Superheroes will work.
Yeah, no, but I think they should. I don't think they should be teaching us. I think there should be assistant teachers, and I think they need more training, like we spoke about with teachers as well, and more CPD for them. Because there's many times that I go into schools and deliver training, and teaching assistants come up to me after and thank me because said we've never had anything like this, or we've never had anybody spend the time explaining in this way. And they are such a key role to play, but the role has moved on from like being a classroom assistant. It's not an easy role to have now, isn't it? You know, it is more about working with the children, you know, and it's definitely moved on from when I was little at school. And you probably see that as well within your trust.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think certainly as a consultant, I'm only recently been a consultant, and I've been a teacher in challenging schools for about 23 years. And I think that's really important to have that connection to the classroom, because actually as a middle leader or as a senior leader, as a consultant, you're expected to bring solutions that work. And if they don't, it's like teaching. If you don't bring solutions for the people who are actually in front of the children that they can use, what is the point of you? You know, what is the point of however much the school is spending on my salary or whatever else is going on? You need to be able to tailor what's happening to the classroom in front of you. I don't particularly like general advice, because I think general advice is just not helpful when a teacher says, yeah, that's great, but what about this kid in this subject, you know, period 5 on a Friday or whatever it is. You need to be able to tailor that stuff as well. And you can't do that unless you've been in those situations or really close to those situations. In terms of TAs, I see a real divide between teachers and TA. So when I have done Ofsted style sort of well, like what they call quality education reviews, more like quality education reviews. And we look at the interaction between the two grown-ups in the classroom, and you just see people that don't make eye contact, they don't necessarily acknowledge each other, they don't know each other's names, you know, and there's this kind of divide. And it's not necessarily a divide in power. Sometimes it's just, as professionals, nobody really knows who's leading the dance. Sometimes you have a young teacher that thinks, I'm still learning about these kids. That TA probably knows what they're doing. I'll just let them get on with it. Or sometimes you have a young TA that's like, well, the teacher's a subject expert and I don't want to interrupt. So you have these barriers that are being created by the roles themselves and the perception of the roles. And I think that's something that's actually easily overcome. But as you're saying, it needs to be addressed directly. It needs to be recognized and it needs to be addressed directly, because there are lots of classes that wouldn't function without an assistant teacher, and I love that.
Mrs. Bowler. So I've had Mrs. Bowler in my class for 7 years, and Miss Critchard now in my class. If it wasn't for them, the children wouldn't be taught the lesson. The things would go wrong. I forget things. Honestly, they are the most important people. I'm very lucky that the relationships I've had with my TAs, Superheroes, which I think is a much better name. She's been amazing to me, and the things that have happened in my career are very much because of her. Because quite often I would do, when we're talking about before, you want that comfort blanket of being able to pull back, do something different in the classroom. Mrs. Bowler was the person who was like, let's just do it, let's go, I'll be there for it, and I was able, she was my comfort blanket, and she'd just go with it, or she'd be like, Simon, you sure you want to do this? It seems a bit random, this one. Let's have a look at this, love. Let's. I'll go and get you a coffee and just think about what you were thinking about doing. So she is the most important person, and I absolutely love her to pieces. If it wasn't for her, like I said, my career wouldn't be where it is now, and the children that have come through my school wouldn't be the happy kids that they've come in and left out because of the relationships she has.
I just think if you're in a school, it has to be a team. It has to be a team.
Teamwork makes a dream work.
It does, honestly, and you have to,
That comes from the top as well.
Yes,
comes from the top
yes,
down.
it does.
You need to have a shared vision. And what you were alluding to earlier, Laura, is there was a bit disconnect in the classroom between a TA and that comes from the top. That comes from your senior leadership. They've got to have a shared vision. Everybody's got to know what the vision is. If there's a disconnect in the vision, that's when.
And that's when it comes down to the policy, doesn't it? And like the aims and the whole ethos of the school, like definitely. Can I talk about lunch times? Because these always seem to be like tricky points when. If I get questions, it's on unstructured times. So if people are contacting me, and I might have to say some things that are quite controversial here, but lunchtimes can be one of the trickiest times during the day for a child and for staff because it's unstructured. You know, they're playing football, there's lots of high energy activities, they're needing to eat and get through, you know, the hall really, really quickly. Why are we putting our least qualified and least experienced sometimes staff with lunchtimes? Why aren't we investing in those people? The same with the TAs. And I always know that lunchtimes really, really work when the teachers are sat with the children, or, you know, that knows that, yeah. And when I go into schools and they say, well, you know, these people, they come in for a couple of hours a day, but they're such valuable members of the team and they have the hardest job at times. And I think they need that recognition as well. And they need that support to help to improve them, you know.
So that's I guess that's a primary school thing. Because at
Yeah.
secondary school, you don't have people external to the schools coming in for lunchtimes. You just don't. You know, those are extra duties that staff might be paid for, might not be paid for.
That's interesting.
And so you have, in some schools where they want those familiar faces, the people that work closest with the kids, sometimes you'll have senior leadership team, which will offer a little bit more money so that people will do those lunchtime duties. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But it is really important for, I think, teachers who are having difficulty getting to know the kids in their classrooms or having difficulty with behavior management need to be on the playground. Absolutely need to be on the playground because, as I was told when I was a young teacher, if you're not winning inside the classroom, you win outside the classroom, and then you bring that into your classroom. And so the more kids that knew me in the hallway or where I could actually say to them something like, "Hi, how are you?" Rather than, "What are you doing?" You know, it's just a totally different question to start the interaction with. And that really helped. And then they were like, "Oh yeah, it's a nice lady I was talking to in the, you know, on the playground, and now you're in the classroom teaching me GCSE Spanish, and actually you're a bit of a human being up there, and you know, we can get this,
I think
going."
that's what primary schools need to adopt more of that model. I really do.
For me, I think we touched on it earlier about positive relationships being the core. Lunchtimes are an opportunity to build relationships. What happened a little bit when I was leading the primary department, we had a cluster of staff just kind of chatting amongst each other. And I'm directing, right, can you do a game over there? Can you do a game over there? Rather than, it's not a chance for staff to catch up. It's a relationship building opportunity to really bond with those children outside of the classroom as well. And then that's gonna benefit the inside of the classroom. Like you and
A Prue that I'm supporting at the minute, doing consultancy work with, they have the dining room, and we've put tablecloths on, so that because the children really need to see the different environments to be able to decipher, you know, and how to change and regulate their behaviour in the different environments. So we've you know, even put photographs, like a family dining room up with tablecloths. I'm trying to persuade the head to get candles on there, you know, little tea lights, the battery operated ones. But it just creates that ambience, and it just brings down, instead of rushing through the meals, you know, and because it doesn't support regulation, and we know that, don't we, when they're rushed through. But I just think it's just so important to create that environment, but have staff, I mean, what do we do in our homes? What would we do with our own families and our own children? Why does it need to be any different outside of school? And we're teaching these children life skills as well, aren't we? But again, that comes from that whole vision of the school.
So speaking about vision, you mentioned before with SLT. So as a teacher, I'm very pleased that we have an amazing head at our school, that when I have these ideas and want to do things, we're able to do that. So the culture throughout our school. But I know some teachers and some people just don't have that. How important do you think that is? For example, we were doing number lines a few weeks ago, and children were just not engaged with it. So I thought we were trying to show how a frog jumps across a number line. So I went to the head teacher. I said, "Can you just pretend to be a frog? I'm just going to take a picture of you." And she stopped what she was doing. She sat down. She pretended to be a frog. Didn't ask why. Let me take a picture. I went back to class, and then I had Mrs. Taylor jumping across the screen, pretend to be a frog, and they were like, "I get it, Mister. Look at Mister," and they were laughing and giggling. But I was able to go and see her, and I knew that she would just go with it. She didn't question why she was asking to be a frog. She just did it. She just finished what she was doing and did it. But I think that's what's really important, that SLT and it's the support you have up there makes you have that comfort blanket, that that okay to be able to do something like you mentioned before.
I was going to say, in terms of the playground. So I remember having really difficult Year 9 Spanish classes. For some reason, Year 9 and Spanish just seemed this horrific combination. And I just thought, right, I'm tired of getting eaten alive by these kids, and I want them to have a good GCSE, pre-GCSE experience. So I asked to be placed on a lunchtime duty on the playground where I knew they all hung out. And I made a beeline for them, and I got to know them in the playground. And that was difficult because actually they tested me out there. And there was a piece of advice I was given a long time ago, which is like, well, if they don't have that relationship with you yet, where they respect you, go get somebody that they respect and bring that person into the. And so I remember having an interaction with them and thinking, okay, I'm going to get the senior vice principal, come in here, and develop that relationship. And that took about a term, I think. But after a while, they were like, "Hey, how you doing?" And then when they came into my class, when they came into my classroom, it was a little bit easier to teach them. But I made a beeline. I thought, right, where are the alpha males? And I made a beeline for them, as opposed to, I just need a break from the children. I need to stay in my classroom. And that's fair enough. Teachers do need a break. But there has to be a long-term strategy to teaching, because if you're at a secondary school, you will have these kids for 5 years, and you want them to be good exam takers. And you have to think to yourself, that kid is going to be sitting my exam, or hopefully sitting my exam on my subject in 5 years. I need to start the long game here.
Absolutely.
And so there's that investment in the children that you teach as well. It's not just the momentary, was this a good day, was this a bad day? It's like, what's the 5-year plan for each one of the kids that's coming into my classroom? And I think that's lost sometimes.
Yeah, or not communicated from
Or
us.
not communicated, yeah.
You've showed tremendous initiative there, and you've been very proactive to kind of seek that out. Whereas like an early career teacher or someone who's got less experience, then you might not know how to do that or how to do that.
Confidence, isn't it, though, as well? Yeah, it's confidence.
If you've got the direction of the SLT, why don't you use this break as an opportunity to do that? That's very different.
It's all about positive modelling, though, as well. Like, I love the example Simon gave of your head teacher, like as a frog. But we all probably can sit here and think about our favourite teachers, can't we? And what they brought.
Who's your favourite teacher, Helen? Who is it?
Oh, Mrs. Watt. But I'm going to start off because when I deliver training, we talk about this, like your favourite teacher. And I remember Mrs. Watt. I mean, she had fabulous curly hair, and she always had loads of rings on her fingers. And it's just that connection, like the frog, or, the connections that you had that you can build up. But then when you look a bit deeper, you go, but why were they your favourite teacher? What made them? And they go, well, she listened to me. She was caring, she was nurturing. So I think that's really key. But we in a school, we've all got to live and breathe that mantra, because that's what works for the children, doesn't it? Ultimately, that's what we need to have in place, the basics to begin with.
Yeah, mine was Mrs. Parker. The reason why it's Mrs. Parker, she's the reason why I became a teacher. When I became a teacher, I wanted to be somebody's Mrs. Parker, because she noticed me, and no one ever noticed. I was very beige, very, very quiet, academically okay, really, really quiet within myself, but she spotted me, and because she saw me, and she noticed me, because she noticed me, and she asked me questions, and that relationship we had is the exact reason why I became a teacher. And what was really nice a few years ago, I was talking about this on it, like, because I tried to find it, because I only knew her teacher name, I didn't know her human name at the time, because a lot of teachers have real life human names as well.
And they wear jeans and everything.
And they go shopping.
They
I
didn't
know where she was. I knew she left the school that I went to, and I talk about her all the time. And I was on BBC Radio Manchester talking about being a teacher, and she heard, and then she rang in. That's amazing.
Wow,
yeah,
that's powerful.
Oh, Simon's tearing up.
yeah. Honestly, yeah. And
That's really touching.
and she now sends me a Christmas card every year. She's an artist now, and she does that's what she does. But I remember talking to her, and she said, "Oh yeah, I used to love hockey. I used to really into art," and she still remembered all these things. But yeah,
That was like an Ian Wright moment.
Yeah,
Have you seen the video?
yes.
We can't stop there. We need to ask Jamie and Laura their favourite teachers. What's your favourite teacher?
My favourite teacher was Mr. Harrison. Looking back now, knowing I'm diagnosed with ADHD, he was a PE teacher, and he was able to kind of channel my energy, which I didn't realise. Obviously, I had an abundance of energy. Looking back, he actually helped me control my energy and be able to kind of regulate and without actually realising it.
Make
So
it purposeful.
He was a massive role model at the time. I didn't really have like the best role models growing up, so he was like one who really stood up. So yeah.
Shout out. Come on, Laura.
Well, I'm going to name drop I had a teacher who I didn't realize was later going to become a famous author, but I don't know if you guys know Frank McCourt, who wrote Tis and who wrote Angela's Ashes.
Oh, wow.
And he was my literature teacher in high school. I went to Stuyvesant High School in New York City. It's always, and he actually taught me Shakespeare. So in the United States, Shakespeare is not a treasured national figure. You know, we have Mark Twain, thank you very much, who's a bit funnier and easier to understand. But he taught Shakespeare, and he was just this, he was like this wonderful, first of all, of course, he had this wonderful Irish accent. But he just somehow made this literature incredibly human. He was an incredibly human person. He was interested in children's stories. He was interested in their personal stories. And high school is all about, you know, drama. We're all like, I'm a teenager, you know, and he helped, I think he just accepted people as they were, whatever drama was going on, whatever they could or could not sit, whatever the issue of the day was, and just this wonderful cover of literature and these stories that he made come to life for us just calmed us all down. And I adored him. And I remember seeing him as in my 20s, I remember running into him on the street and saying, Mr. McCourt, you know, you used to teach me. He said, well, you know, I'm working on a book now. We'll see what happens. And it turns out to be Angela's Ashes, which was then made into a movie. And his third book was Teacher Man. And Teacher Man was about his experiences of being a teacher in New York City over a number of years after he immigrated from Ireland. And actually it ends with a story of a friend of mine who was in an accident and disabled from it in high school. But he's got to be hands down my favorite, just very, very favorite teacher. Just such a human being and a good storyteller.
And it's that personality, isn't it, what it can bring, whether it's like you're into music or computing or, you know, it's just something that you can bring that just encapsulates the child and engages them. And then once you're there, it's the best feeling, like you said, didn't it, Jamie?
Looking at resources, what do you feel AI brings to the table? Would you use it? How is it best used within schools? Should we use it? Where do you think it might go?
I don't know if you guys have seen, but I think there's an AI school in London somewhere.
AI school in London?
Yeah, so there's AI basically replacing the classroom teacher, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll fly, honestly.
So the next
That really worries me.
time we're going to have robots replace that. We're going to be out of a job, basically.
I just think absolutely there's a place for technology and things like this, but it can't replace people and it can't replace the relationships that we bring. And I think, like with AI, there's definitely a place for it, but it does worry me, especially when there's lots of talk about AI generating teachers' reports. I understand it can help with workload, but then as a parent, getting a generic report about my child takes away that personal factor and that, you know, do they know my child and, you know, do they care for? I find it a worry.
I think when you're saying about like the access arrangements, Laura, for like tests, I think AI could prove a point in that in the future. Maybe like to like read something out, or it could be a little bit more, maybe provide a little bit more access to students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the functionality of, you know, read aloud functions, the what is it called? The immersive reader. Immersive reader. Yeah. Things that have been accessibility features for visually impaired or for, you know, hearing impaired helps quite a lot. One of the things that they have taken on board this year in terms of the JCQ access arrangements is now they've allowed, which I think is, again, revolutionary, should have been thought of a long time ago, but revolutionary, is allowing EAL children to have computer readers. So before this past year, the kids were only ever allowed to have dictionaries.
Yeah.
And the extra time. Well, what happens if your language has not been codified, there is no dictionary available for it, or the dictionaries that are available are so costly that it's just prohibitive for a school that has 86 languages in it to get a dictionary for everybody that needs an access arrangement. So in terms of being able to translate things and being able to translate to the 12 or 17 or 20 languages that you have in one classroom, I mean, this is what London schools look like. It's probably what a lot of Manchester and Birmingham and other cities look like, is that you don't necessarily have one large language group. So if everything is in Bengali, most people are taken care of. You don't have that in London schools. So I think that would be a really useful functionality to have, because that's going to cut down on teacher workload. And then it would be people like us who would say, well, then how do you tailor, what parts do you translate? When do you start to take that scaffolding away?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that a student can fire their cognitive, can fire their cognitive on the content and maybe pull from a previous education experience, and then be able to put the English in. But again, that's AI working with a professional in the classroom that knows the teachers and that understands pedagogy. And those two things have to go together. They can't replace each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know about this whole AI thing that you got.
You mentioned the AI school with like robots coming in. What is your robot like? Can you do the robot? I'm just interested.
I'm purely lower body dance moves only.
What about the caterpillar? No?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, that was my teacher voice there. That was very firm.
Okay.
I mean, we could talk about lack of funding, but what are the best ways for school to manage the funding that we do have through resources, training, or what is the best way we can manage our funding that we do have?
It is a tricky question, and I think, it always, whenever I go into schools, it always comes down to budgets, it always comes down to money. I think it is going back to what we spoke about and targeting those needs and not jumping on initiatives just because it's new in education, but saying, actually, how can this be purposeful? How can this be used in our school, and how can it enhance our school and our learners? I always think the best investment is going to be your staff. And that's where the money should go, on the training, the CPD, but also on staff wellbeing. I think that's really key, that we invest back in our people and we help them. I mean, staff retention is at its like lowest, isn't it? And mental health crisis, again, like we said before about COVID, I just think schools need to be creative with how they can bring that team together and support the mental health of their staff in schools. And funding maybe should be focused around that, because this is what the children need, is they need the adults, and they need the adults to be present, not just physically present, but emotionally present, and to be able to connect and have that time with the child, and not be distracted. Sorry, that was my last point.
I think schools need to be redefined because currently they are an emergency service. So, and this is something that I think has not been, the conversation between, for instance, where the NHS has left off and what schools are now doing, where social services has left off and what schools are now doing, etc. If schools are busy, giving out toiletries and feeding families and giving out clothes and trying to make sure the kids have food banks and have a warm place to be in the weather, that's gonna, we're talking about funding going towards basic needs. We're not talking about funding going towards AI and chatbots and, what you can do for your GCSEs. None of that is like on the table. And so I think that needs to come back into the conversation. Like, what are we actually asking schools to do? And so what are we actually funding? Are we funding a place that they get a warm meal from? Or are we actually funding a place which is going to enable them to be thinkers for the future? If we don't have that conversation openly, then I don't really understand how we're going to jump beyond that to get to the conversations about, well, should we get iPads or should we not get iPads? Well, these kids need winter coats. There's that kind of disconnect in the conversation, and I think that needs to be addressed.
And I think also, just going on the point of like understanding the backgrounds of the family and the children's within our schools, looking at how we're adapting the provision to meet those. A lot of the school buildings are not in what we would, I mean, this is beautiful. The Rainbow Hub that we're in today is absolutely fantastic. But a lot of schools are built in Victorian buildings and they don't meet purpose for safety needs as well. So absolutely, funding needs to be invested in the staff, but also in safety. So ensure that, the children are safe and the staff are safe.
Yeah, we had to relocate one of our units because it was made from the crumbling breeze blocks.
Yeah.
And that was a major transition for anyone, but especially neurodivergent children, when they were obviously so used to their routine, and then this is where you're teaching now. And I had a period where the building wasn't ready as well.
Yes.
So they had those like homeschool implications, and parents were really, really struggling to manage, and we physically could not do anything because we didn't have a building safe and ready.
No. And we need to make sure that systems are up to date to help with safeguarding.
and we'll all know, and especially like Jamie with your setting, buttons high up, you know, and door handles in the right places, and you know, it is little things like that.
Obviously, different safety aspects. This is beautifully done with the touch panels. That wouldn't work in my setting because the children would just be away and absconding. But like you say, it has to be purpose built, and this provision is beautiful and it is purpose built.
It needs to. We go back to Maslow, like what you were saying, don't we? Those basic needs and those safety needs, and that's. I think that's where the funding needs to come. I think it needs to be really purposeful and pinpointed, and what meets the needs of our cohort and our community, because similar to schools are communities. They're central to hubs now, and lots of families turn to them for very different reasons.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's happening across our schools is the pinging back and forth between SENCOs and GPs. So when parents want a diagnosis or they have some concerns, and the school is telling them, well, you go to your GP to start that process, and they go to the GP, so the GP says, well, that's actually a school thing that should be happen, and that's where you don't have the main public sectors talking to each other. Now, EHCPs were supposed to create that. That's kind of happened, but kind of not. I think mostly because the NHS has had to move on from the place where it was before COVID. It's got all sorts of other things that it's need to deal with. And actually schools haven't caught up to where the NHS is now. And so again, that public sector disconnect is having a huge impact on schools and what schools can provide and what schools can fund. So I think that has to happen, definitely. And then we can talk about buildings and buttons and just general health and safety, which I think is health and safety does impinge on safeguarding, but health and safety is actually its own thing when you're talking about the RAC concrete and stuff. So again, I think, what do we want schools to do? What do we want schools to do? Do you want them to do it all? They can't do it all. They can't do it all and look at a digital future. They just can't.
No. And I think you're right. I think when across the whole nation we talk about well-being and mental health, and there's different frameworks with the different nations. Like, say, for instance, in Scotland, they very much do talk about that multi-agency approach and that whole team, because even though schools can't be, all this pressure cannot be put on schools to be social workers or, clinicians, and the referral process is out of control, isn't it? And you'll know this, Jamie, as well, with going through your diagnosis, and how schools play such a central part to that, but are putting an enormous amount of pressure on the staff in there.
You talk about well-being there, Helen. So I always automatically think teachers' well-being, but